Module 2, Providing Habilitative Supports. The purpose of Module 2 is to give you some detailed information on how to provide habilitative supports to an individual with a disability. By the end of this module, you will be able to describe the history of community-based services, who and how decisions are made to use habilitative supports, how community-based activities are chosen, the features of an adaptation, what it means to provide personal assistance, and 3 things to look for in an observation of an activity. At this point, let's take a few minutes and talk about how and why we provide community-based services to people with disabilities. How did it come to be that families are now able to sit down and make choices about the kinds of services they want for their son or daughter? It wasn't always that way. On the next slide, you will go back in time and find out more about the journey that people with disabilities have taken to become part of their community. Click on the buttons below to understand the history of services for people with developmental disabilities. Before 1800, children and adults with disabilities are looked at as objects of scorn, deviant, defective, and oftentimes treated inhumanely. This is the beginning of centralized services and the creation of institutions. Care is based on the medical model, where individuals are looked upon as sick and often incurable. Long-term care and protection are the goals. Warehousing in institutions continues. Institutions ensure that interaction between citizens and surrounding communities and residents with disabilities does not occur. Some institutions house as many as 6,000 residents. Disability is still viewed as a defect and should be cured. Children who use wheelchairs, are not toilet trained, or considered uneducable are excluded from public schools. Those who are allowed to attend are put in special classes or special day schools. Most children with disabilities attend private schools organized and staffed by parents and volunteers serving only children with disabilities. There is a powerful movement away from segregated settings for the education of minority students. A landmark court case, Brown v. Board of Education, rules that separate is not equal. The decision has an immediate impact on minority students, but also leads the way for integrated services for people with disabilities. During this time, parents of children with disabilities organize and begin advocacy activities for the rights of their children to be educated in normal school environments with their peers. The Association for Retarded Citizens, ARC, is established as the first important parent organization. Its purpose is to provide educational, vocational, and residential services to individuals with disabilities, as well as to advocate on their behalf. The principle of normalization is developed in Sweden in 1969 by Bengt Nierjev. In the early 70s, the concept is introduced into the United States by Wolfensberger. The normalization principle is developed in response to the devaluing and marginalizing of people with disabilities. The principle involves the acceptance of people with disabilities, offering them the same conditions and rhythms of life as are offered to all citizens. It states that when services are provided to an individual with a disability, they should bring that individual as close as possible to the activities and expectations of typical daily life as his non-disabled peer. The normalization principle supports the concept of assisting individuals with disabilities to participate in valued activities and to contribute to their community by taking on socially enhancing roles. The principle of normalization has a major effect on the way services for people with disabilities are structured in the United States and other parts of the world. Disability is seen not simply as a medical issue now, but as a social situation. Lawsuits are filed to close institutions and federal funds become available to establish residential care facilities. A variety of federal laws are passed by Congress regarding the rights of people with disabilities. Independent living centers are founded by and for people with disabilities. Services focus on assisting individuals to become contributing, active, and functional members of their community. The state of Idaho establishes and runs adult and child development centers to provide educational and vocational services to all individuals with disabilities. In 1973, Congress passes the Reauthorization Act, Section 504, and later amendments that guarantee the rights of people with disabilities in employment and in educational settings that receive federal funds. In 1975, due to pressure from parents, courts, and legislatures, Congress passes PL 94-142, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, now called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. The Act extends to all children, regardless of disability, the right to a free public education offered in the least segregated setting possible. In response to practices of excluding individuals, the principle of partial participation is developed by teachers and academics across the country who work with people who have disabilities. The principle states that an individual with a disability can, at a minimum, partially participate in any activity. It does not use an individual's developmental age for programming, nor does it require that a person can perform all of the skills required in an activity before the activity takes place. It does not assume that a person will be independent on all skills, and it does not require that certain skills be mastered before the person goes to a specific environment. Activities can therefore be accomplished by adapting how the activity is done, changing the materials, providing assistance during the activity, and/or changing how the activity is completed. In 1986, Congress establishes Part H programs, now known as Part C, for infants birth to 2 years of age and toddlers 3 to 5 years of age. The legislation promises services to all young children with disabilities and their families. The 1980s also see an increase in the closure of institutions across the United States. By 1986, there are fewer than 100,000 people with developmental disabilities in public institutions. There are major strides in the development of employment programs for people with disabilities. Idaho establishes the first private developmental disabilities agencies and begins to reduce their role in providing direct services. The Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, aims to end all forms of discrimination toward people with disabilities. The Act guarantees individuals with disabilities access to employment, housing, education, transportation, and all other rights given to all other citizens of the United States. IDEA is reauthorized by Congress. The law now requires that children with disabilities have access to the general education curriculum and that their programs are aligned with state standards and that they participate in state assessments or alternate assessments. In 2007, the Idaho legislature passes a new Medicaid program called Self-Direction that allows adults with disabilities to direct their own services and budgets. In 2010, the legislature votes to delete the language of mental retardation from future state rules and documents and to replace it with the term intellectual disability. In 2011, the legislature votes for a rule to allow families to self-direct services for their children with disabilities. As you will recall from Module 1, there are 3 types of services that a family can access: habilitative intervention, respite, and/or habilitative support services. Interventions are intended to teach a child new skills and/or to minimize problem behaviors. Respite services can be used to provide relief to a family on a short-term basis. And habilitative support services are designed to do just what the word says: support a child by helping him participate and enjoy age-appropriate activities enjoyed by other children. The decision about when to provide habilitative supports begins with a child's family as they talk to their case manager. A case manager is a person who works with a family and helps them decide which services will be most beneficial for their son or daughter. The discussion between the case manager and the family is meant to be a family-centered process. That is, the family decides what will meet their needs and the needs of their child, and talk about the kinds of activities they would like their child to participate in. A family works with a case manager on a regular basis to make sure that things are going well and changes do not need to be made to the program. For example, say you start supporting a child in an activity and you and your supervisor decide that you need some additional help. You may need someone to show you how to communicate better with a child or how to assist a child to go up and down stairs. The case manager would consult with the family and work with your supervisor to arrange a time for a therapist to come and provide some assistance to you. You can get additional support from a speech therapist, a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, and other specialists working with the child and family. This kind of additional support is available for children who receive habilitative supports or habilitative intervention. The case manager will help the family choose activities based on the child's likes and interests and what is available in the community. They will also look at activities that are age appropriate and how the child might participate when interacting with typical peers. They will think about the opportunities the child will have to use his skills as well as the opportunities to build friendships and social connections. Now that you understand how activities are chosen, let's move on and look at some strategies that will help you support a child in an activity. Once your supervisor has provided you with some detailed information about a child, it will be a good idea for you to have more of a sense of the kind of environment in which an activity will take place. Conducting an observation of a community setting will help you figure out the kinds of things you need to adapt, as well as when you need to provide personal assistance and how an individual might participate in an activity. Taking the time to look around can be very helpful, and you will find that you notice things that will impact the experience for both you and the person you are supporting. Things you might look for during an observation include what kinds of things are other people doing? What are the opportunities for the individual to use his skills? What are the opportunities to interact with typical peers? Where are the bathrooms? Are there any obstacles to having the individual participate in an activity? Looking for obstacles in an environment isn't something we do naturally, but it is a critical part of doing a good observation. An obstacle can be defined as something in the environment that interferes with an individual's ability to participate in an activity. Obstacles can come in a variety of forms, including things like noise level, number of people in a place, lighting, or the amount of commotion in an environment. Information provided by the family will give you and your supervisor a heads up to any issues the child might have, so that you can be aware of anything that might impact the individual's experience and make the appropriate accommodations. Another thing that can be an obstacle is you as the support provider. It will be important that you make sure that you are not so supportive that you isolate a child by hovering and not allow the child to participate in an activity. You want to keep the child safe, but you also want to create a natural experience for him. Now that you understand how activities are chosen, let's move on and look at some strategies that will help you support a child in an activity. Once your supervisor has provided you with some detailed information about a child, it will be a good idea for you to have more of a sense of the kind of environment in which an activity will take place. Conducting an observation of a community setting will help you figure out the kinds of things you need to adapt, as well as when you need to provide personal assistance and how an individual might participate in an activity. Taking the time to look around can be very helpful, and you will find that you notice things that will impact the experience for both you and the person you are supporting. An adaptation is an adjustment or modification to an activity or the environment. It builds on the individual's existing skills and compensates for those skills that are missing. For example, using a piece of adapted equipment or rearranging the furniture in a room so a person in a wheelchair can have access to an activity. An adaptation consists of providing assistance within the activity from a peer or an adult, changing the materials, or changing the way the activity is completed. That is, you may provide assistance with an activity like helping a child check out a library book by pointing to the desk and assisting the child to hand the book to the librarian. Changing the materials used in an activity might be something like having the child use a glue stick instead of a stapler. And changing the way an activity is completed might be having an individual use something called the next dollar strategy. This kind of adaptation does not require the person to understand the value of different coins, but only that he put out a certain number of dollar bills depending on the price of the item. For example, if an item costs $1.29, the individual puts $2 bills on the counter and does not have to worry about using the correct change. Other things to think about when making support decisions include, does the adaptation make the child stand out from the other children? Does it make him look more competent or less competent? Does he have more access to his peers? And is the adaptation age appropriate? In addition to using assistance as an adaptation within an activity, You may also need to provide personal assistance as a part of a child's routine care. Your supervisor will discuss how and when to provide personal assistance based on information gathered at the family-centered meeting. Personal assistance means providing physical support to a child who has medical needs or who needs help with activities of daily living, such as helping a child dress or undress, assisting with a bathroom routine, or assisting a person to get into a wheelchair. One of the most important roles that you will play as a habilitative support provider will be to recognize the opportunities within an activity for an individual you support to interact and build relationships with typical peers. We all have relationships that are built on several things, including similar interests and our experience with one another. The nice thing about having a person participate in one activity over a period of time is that he will get to know people in that place and they will get to know him. Providing support in a community-based activity is also an opportunity for an individual to practice using certain skills. This may come in a variety of forms, from using expressive language skills like saying hello to choosing an item from a menu. At the initial planning meeting, the individual's family will provide information to the case manager about what kinds of skills they want their son or daughter to practice in a community setting. Your supervisor will share that information with you and help you make decisions about potential opportunities for the individual to practice. It will be important to plan where and when a person might interact with a peer or use his skills, but it will also be important for you to recognize unplanned opportunities. That is, to pay attention to unplanned moments where you can facilitate an interaction or have the person practice a skill. Now let's move on and take a look at some strategies that Henry's support provider and her supervisor used to plan how Henry could participate at the bowling alley. In the next couple of slides, you will see how they conducted an observation and wrote down the important things they wanted to remember in order to provide quality support for him. In the attachments at the beginning of this module, you can print a copy of Henry's experience at the bowling alley and his completed observation and support guides. During Henry's family-centered planning meeting, his mom and dad told their case manager that their son liked to bowl. They wanted him to participate in this activity several times a week and decided that the habilitative support service could meet his needs. After this decision was made, the staff from the Developmental Disability Agency worked out the details. Rachel was assigned to be Henry's support provider. She and her supervisor decided that to provide quality support, it would be a good idea to do an observation of the bowling alley before Henry participated in the activity. This form shows you the kind of information they thought it was important to gather. They first looked at the basic flow of the activity. They saw that people typically arrived at the bowling alley, checked in at the desk, paid the fee, and got their shoes. They changed into their bowling shoes, bowled several games, got their street shoes back on, and returned the bowling shoes back to the desk. After talking to Henry's parents, Rachel and her supervisor noted that Henry would need some adapted equipment to be a more independent bowler. His parents had told them that he could carry the ball and hold it, but it was difficult for him to throw the ball down the lane. They suggested that he use a bowling ramp that was available at the bowling alley. As Rachel and her supervisor looked around, they saw several things they would consider obstacles for Henry. There were stairs going down to each of the bowling lanes, and it was a long way from the bowling lanes to the restroom. They wanted to consider these things to make sure that they provided the assistance he needed so that he would not get too tired during the activity. During the observation, they saw several natural opportunities for Henry to practice his language skills, like when he arrived at the bowling alley and was greeted by Luke, the manager. They also thought that getting a snack after bowling was a good time for him to practice using his money skills. As they looked around, they also saw potential opportunities for Henry to socialize and interact with other teenagers who were bowling and went to the snack bar. Once an observation was completed, Rachel and her supervisor thought more about specific ways to support Henry. Based on what they knew about him, They talked about the different kinds of assistance he would need, specific strategies to encourage him to use his language and money skills, and the natural cues in the environment that would provide opportunities for him to interact with peers and other people. They discussed how they needed to modify the bowling activity by making it shorter to accommodate for Henry's endurance level. Because the restrooms were so far away from the bowling lanes, it took Henry time to walk there. He would need time to stop every once in a while and rest. Rachel and her supervisor decided that they did not, at this point, think there were any changes to materials. The changes to the environment was having Henry use a bowling ramp to get the ball down the lane. After conducting the observation, it was clear that Henry would need some personal assistance with things like tying his bowling shoes, walking up and down the stairs, and holding items if he began to shake. It was also apparent from what they knew about Henry that he would perhaps need some additional assistance. The information from his family helped them figure out the prompts that he would likely need during the entire activity. These included a verbal prompt to say hello to someone, pointing to a chair as a cue to take off his coat and shoes, pointing to his bowling shoes as a prompt for him to put them on, pointing to the bowling ball to remind him to pick it up each time and put it on the ramp, and a facial and verbal cue to take out his money. It was also important that Henry have opportunities to interact with other teenagers. Rachel and her supervisor decided there would be several potential places for him to get to know people. Just bowling itself created lots of opportunities for social interaction, from getting his shoes to finding a ball to getting to know people who were bowling in the next lane. There were also potential opportunities to interact at the snack bar. Finally, they thought it was important to figure out how Henry could practice some of the skills he was learning at home and at school. They decided that he could use his language skills when greeting Luke the manager, any peers he interacted with, and the cashier at the snack bar. They also decided that he could practice using his money skills each time he bought a snack. On the next slide, you will see a video of Rachel and Henry at the bowling alley. Watch how Rachel provides assistance to Henry, prompts and reinforces him, and facilitates interactions with peers and other people. Notice how Rachel adjusts the bowling ramp for Henry. He is interested in the various ceiling fans, so she redirects him by pointing to the ball, giving him some verbal guidance, and encouraging him by clapping when he picks up the ball. She continues to clap to reinforce him for knocking down the pins, and then goes over to him to tell him what a good job he did. In this clip, watch how Rachel facilitates an interaction with a boy who wants to use one of their bowling balls. See how Rachel provides Henry with personal assistance as he walks up the stairs, and then guides him to the snack bar. In the snack bar, Henry has a chance to practice his money skills by paying for his snack. When he turns around, Rachel directs him back to the counter and prompts him to take his money. She also sees an opportunity for Henry to interact with the boys who borrowed the bowling ball. She says hello and then asks if she and Henry can join them. In Module 2, you learned how a family is involved in choosing community-based activities for their son or daughter. You read about the history of services for people with developmental disabilities and the changes that have impacted their lives. You received more specific information about how to provide habilitative supports and the kinds of things to look for in an environment that can help a child be a more active participant. You saw an example of the process that Henry and Tony's providers used to plan and carry out their support in community-based activities. In the next module, you will receive information about learning and behavior and some things that will be helpful to you in your role as a habilitative supports provider.